Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we will be listening to the fourth part of What If Deku Was in Villain Class 1A. If you enjoy, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing down below, and don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified when videos go live. Now, without further ado, let's get into the video. Chapter 11, What Do We Want? Midoriya yelled about Monoma's incompetence for the rest of the evening, and it was beautiful. Tsu didn't understand why people didn't just speak their mind all the time. Life would be so much simpler if everyone were brutally honest at all times and destroyed any and all friendships. Tsu would just go and live with the frogs in a swamp and watch the world burn down from a distance. Frogs would be honest because they have little to say. Okay, maybe the mindset of this class was starting to get to her, and global annihilation was so much more appealing than it was about a month ago. Of course, Tsu is not actually a villain and would never genuinely want such a thing. But again, still more appealing. She'd settle with the damage Class A's plan would do to society. She also offered to jump kick Monoma in the face for Tokoyami next time she saw him, because Tokoyami and Dark Shadow were wonderful birds that did not deserve such treatment, and Tsu would always stand up for her animal mutation quirk kin. The encounter did not remain a secret for long. Soon enough, Mr. Aizawa appeared at the dorms, and Midoriya was still in an awfully bad mood. Tsu was only disappointed that she didn't have any popcorn, but they did have Sato's freshly made cupcakes. Why were so many of you out at the edge of the school when a storm was rolling over? Mr. Aizawa snapped. Everyone else just sat back and let Midoriya take the wheel. Do we really need to recite the excuses for everyone? It was a complete coincidence that everyone ended up in the same place, he exclaimed. This, so far, was entirely truthful. Team Yellow and Blue were never supposed to meet up, and Monoma and his crew certainly weren't meant to be there. Monoma was right to say it was suspicious, their teacher continued, his eyes narrowing. It was really the only facial expression visible since he was still covered in bandages from head to toe. Especially so soon after the USJ. That doesn't mean he went about it in the right way. I want to know the truth. Midoriya sighed. Kaken was arguing with Jiro, Kirishima followed, and Tokoyami was out for a walk, like he always does. Still the truth, Midoriya had asked for as much detail as possible into what had happened the moment they'd gotten back, likely for exactly this reason. They came across the others by accident and stepped in because Monoma was accusing them of doing something. And what were the others doing? Well, Uraraka was helping Kaminari with his quirk. I've told you I help with some quirks here, Mina has too. Kaminari's works better if he unloads his electricity regularly, but he hasn't done so in a while, and with the static in the air it was getting dangerous. If Uraraka could make him float, then he wouldn't be touching the ground and it would be unlikely he hurt anyone. They decided to move away from the dorms for obvious reasons and ended up by the power source or whatever that was. They were leaving when Monoma turned up. Check the security cameras, they'll back my story up. Sato was there because his cupcakes were still in the oven and he wanted something to do, and Shoji came for similar reasons and just in case something went wrong. All honest. Tsu was frankly impressed. Okako handed her a cupcake and she started to pick at it whilst Midoriya continued on his rant. Then Monoma turned up thinking he knew better and that they were up to something. When they wouldn't tell him what he wanted to hear, he copied Tokoyama's quirk and threatened them with it. So, Uraraka messaged me to come and help. Kirishima stopped the copied shadow from hurting anyone and I managed to cancel the quirk out with my quirklessness, like I've done before. Except Monoma still seems to think that I can steal his ability. Why didn't you contact me? Mr. Aizawa questioned, his eyes flickering towards Okako. You have the phones for this exact reason. Uraraka swallowed a mouthful of cake. Be because you're hurt, and I didn't know how quickly you could get there. Also, she didn't want Mr. Aizawa asking these kinds of questions before they could think up a good enough story. Then you should have messaged Midnight. Midnight hates us, Kaminari contradicted. And whose fault is that? Whoa, rude, Mina scoffed. It doesn't matter, Midoriya interjected, his arms crossed, what's done is done. Uraraka knew that my quirk, or lack of, could cancel out Monoma's and it worked fine. If you turned up instead, you could only stop it for as long as you could look at him without blinking. My method removed the threat entirely. Mr. Aizawa simply sighed, clearly done with the situation. 18, go to recovery girl. He glared at him, no. That cut needs healing. It's fine. It'll scar. I don't care. Sue shoved more cupcake in her mouth. Mr. Aizawa gave up. 1. Are you feeling better from the incident yesterday? We. Aoyama replied with a dazzling smile. Of course, he'd blown up the wall in their classroom to provide a distraction and had written it off as a quirk accident that gave him a terrible stomachache. Another sigh. Good. Fine, no one's in trouble. You'll be pleased to know Monoma will receive detention for this. Mina raised her hand eagerly. Yes, too. Does he wash our dishes? No. Ah. Is there anything else you need to inform me of? Silence. Good. Behave, message me if something else goes wrong. And with that, he turned and left them be. Way to go, Midoriya, laughed Kyoka. I've never seen anyone tell the truth so falsely before. That doesn't even make sense, frowned Kaminari. Maybe to you, Jaminye. I've told you. That's not going to be my vigilante name. If Jiro's praising you, you know you've done well, said Suro. The real reason that Jiro's here is that she knew so many secrets that it scared the heroes, and she never told them the truth, truthfully. Mina tried. Suro nodded sagely. There was an attempt. Kyoka knew more about villain operations than the most extensive spy network in Japan, Ribbit, Tsu interjected. Flushing red, Kyoka managed to add, I am the most extensive spy network in Japan. Everyone laughed. Midoriya finally breathed a sigh of relief, scratching at the large plaster Yaoyorozu had covered his gash with. Okay, who wants their phone fixed next? Most of the class immediately fell silent and thrust a hand into the air, the others quickly followed suit. Me. Me. Mina exclaimed, waving her hand about and trying to reach higher into the air, as if that would help. You can't contact anyone outside of UA, no inserting new numbers into them, Midoriya reminded them all. I am not 100% sure if the principal will be alerted to outgoing calls. Tsu noted how Shoto shifted awkwardly in his seat as he unsurely accepted a cupcake from Sato, who was passing them around the room. I'll trade you my cupcake for it, Kyoka offered. There was a moment of hesitation. Jiro wins, Midoriya announced to a room of disappointed people, accepting both an extra cupcake and her phone. Bribery, Mina pouted. Was there even a second of doubt in this class? Kyoka smirked. I still have both my cupcake and a promise of fixing my phone, only later, Ribbit, Tsu pointed out. Yeah, whatever. Okako felt bad and split her cupcake with her. Midoriya seemed to feel no remorse and Tsu respected that. Midoriya soon found himself with a growing line of phones. The order of which was hotly distributed for no good reason and involved the bartering of cupcakes and other items of food, squirreled away for situations such as these. So, it's all going down tomorrow then, right? Kirishima perked up as he rested his phone down at the end of the line. Why yes, Midoriya replied with a gulp, not looking up from his work. I suppose it is. The atmosphere shifted. It was an intoxicating mix of excitement, anticipation, and unadulterated fear. Midoriya could feel a great weight hanging on his shoulders, crushing his lungs, turning his heart partially to lead in the fear of it all. What do we bring? Was Hagakuru's contribution. Air, Midoriya started, before Aitsa took over. Pack your school rucksack with spare clothes, any money you may have, and anything else you might deem absolutely necessary, he nodded surely. Make sure it isn't too heavy. There was a moment of silence, as everyone thought through this predicament. Wow, I know this was pretty obvious, but this feels a whole lot more serious all of a sudden, Kaminari chuckled nervously. I know we should have brought this up earlier but, where are we going to go if we get out of UA, asked Yurika, sitting down beside Midoriya and looking at him expectantly, as though he knew the answer. He didn't. I have a few options. That was Shoto. He didn't speak much to the rest of the class, so it must have been a shock to hear him make a contribution so suddenly. Dabby and I moved around a lot over the last few years. I know he's not active in this area, he won't be a problem. But there's an abandoned warehouse nearby, not too close to be on UA's radar. How are we going to get food? Yurika continued to interrogate. I mean, I'm happy to, take some stuff, but we will not be resorting to such crimes, Aitsa retorted. It was clear that, out of everyone in Class A, Aitsa was the least keen to go through with this plan. Midoriya sometimes wondered how much he trusted him anymore. Or maybe if he regretted becoming close friends. We might not have a choice, Itza, pointed out Zero, with the tone of someone who had been in that situation before. I can fix that problem, Yayorozu interjected as she casually collected empty teacups from around the room. Before I was, caught. I did start slowly moving some of my own money into a new bank account. I felt bad for all the fake notes I was making. So, I was going to use the money to donate to where I'd wronged. Not that I ever managed to do so. At this point, tensions were high, and we all knew we were in trouble. It was too late to fix anything. Her solemn attitude changed in less than a second when she stood up straight, a wide smile on her face and her hands clasped together. But this comes in useful for us now. I can use the money to help us. And my quirk can step in to make anything extra we might need. I can supply the electricity, Kaminari grinned. I'm getting better now. We know this. We should not simply rely on your money, Yayorozu, said Itza, it would be unfair on your behalf. I shall contribute as well. You gotta be super careful when withdrawing money then, Hagakure advised. Do it real far from this warehouse place and only make transactions in cash. Itza nodded, not questioning why Hagakure knew this little detail. Midoriya finished his work on the phone he was tampering with. With a sigh, he sat back after pushing it to the other side of the table. The aim is to get a big name for ourselves. We'd have to lie low after getting out for a while, whilst the press goes wild with the information of us getting out. And it'll be tricky to stay off their radar and not get caught. But I think a lot of us have experience in that matter, so hopefully it'll be okay. And then we can start on the vigilante thing, only once we're sure we're safe. How long do you think that will take, Ribbit? Asked Sue, prodding her chin thoughtfully. Not sure? Maybe a couple of weeks at the very least. Mina gasped and clapped her hands, grasping everyone's attention immediately. We need to make vigilante outfits. Well, we don't really need disguises, Sue pointed out. Everyone already knows who we are from Class A, Ribbit. Yeah, she scoffed, but still. Oh. And code names. We've already had this conversation and it didn't end well, Kyoka rolled her eyes, sinking further into her armchair. I am Alien Queen. Mina yelled, ignoring her. Why don't we focus on actually getting out of this freaking place first, idiots? Kaken shouted back. Bakugo is correct, Itza nodded. We need a new plan of action. And all eyes were back on Midoriya. Swallowing his fear, he stood up, waltzed towards the whiteboard, and accepted a whiteboard marker from Shoji, who was already standing by the drawer. The only sound in the room in that moment was that of the marker against the board, as Midoriya carefully plotted their escape, assigned new teams, with new colors, and soon after, watched the smiles creep across his friends' faces. There were only two ways this could go. And Midoriya knew all too well, somehow, no matter how long it would take, they would end up back at UA, back in this room. Just this time, he wasn't going to let it be so easy for them. Okay, first things first, let's identify the best time to begin the plan, Midoriya decided. Probably after 9, when Mr. Aizawa locks the dorms up, Ribbit, Sue replied. Midoriya nodded and wrote that on the board. Okay, we won't copy his door key. It was a good idea. Just, using the windows is a safer bet. But remember, we need to get a group out of the dorms and to the main school in order to take out the power. For that to happen, there's a specific camera I need someone to deal with. You are dead, round face. Eureka screamed and ran out of the front door, Kaken in hot pursuit. She skidded around the corner to run right to the back of the dorms. Her classmates giggled and watched from the windows. Right by one, at the window furthest from the front door, where trees lined the edge of the dorms, she activated her quirk on herself, jumped off a tree, and backflipped above the window, accidentally kicking the security camera there, and knocking its angle so it pointed up at the cloudy, morning sky. All the camera caught from that moment on, was a puff of smoke, as Eureka leapt off the wall like a spider, and kicked Kaken in the face. Oh, this is so fun. Once that's out of the way, our first team will be free to slip out of that window, run through the trees, and reach the edge of the main school building, where that hole is that Aoyama made. Debris from it took out the camera below, so, good job. Doreen. Aoyama grinned, tossing his hair out of his face flamboyantly. Yeah. Midoriya cleared his throat, but before that team can leave, we need to start removing their tracker anklets. Mina punched the air, yes. Finally. Moment of truth, Hagakure murmured as the class gathered around. Kaminari winced and looked away whilst Mina pulled off a glove and traced a pink finger along the seam of his anklet. With a frightening hiss, the thick, insulated plastic began to bubble and melt. Before it could touch his skin, Mina had pulled it away and tossed it into the tray supplied by Yaoyorozu. Is it off?" he asked, daring to take a peek. "It's off." "You did it, Mina!" Okako exclaimed, clapping her hands. Mina positively glowed with pride. Midoriya knelt down by the tray. Well, you melted it really well along the lockable seam, so it shouldn't have disturbed the electrics. Hopefully, it still works and is still transmitting a location to the principal." Most ignored his muttering whilst Mina was showered with praise, and she was loving it. "Okay. If you go and put this on your bed in your room, it'll look like you just went to bed," Midoriya explained, handing the small tray to Kaminari, who nodded and hurried off. Midoriya narrowed his eyes and glanced around the room. "Why yes, could we do Zero's next, please?" "Team Orange will be those who are taking the power out for the cameras," Midoriya announced, writing the team's title on the whiteboard as he spoke. "We obviously need Kaminari, and then you guys suggested Sato too, right?" "Yep." Yurika replied. "Sato's gonna expose the wires for us." Midoriya nodded and added his name to the list. "Okay, right, and then Yurika, you'll go too, as well as, yeah, Zero." Kaminari gave the rest of the class 2 thumbs up as he jumped out the window and landed beside Sato. He nervously looked up, but soon saw that the camera that Yurika had repositioned still hadn't moved. He breathed a sigh of relief. "Don't forget your backpack," Yurika whispered to him as she handed it over. "Oh, thanks." In silence, the 4 of them hurried away from the dorms, all dressed in the darkest clothing they could find. They ran the long way around school. Midoriya had left them a good amount of time to get set up, so they weren't in a rush. That didn't stop Kaminari's heart beating at 100 miles per hour, pumping the adrenaline around his body. They did have to make sure they arrived at the perfect moment, when Hound Dog wasn't patrolling nearby, but they had Hagakure's input to thank for avoiding that problem. Also, UA is a lot taller when you're standing right at the bottom of it, preparing to climb. The H-shaped building technically had 4 sections of roof. Fortunately for them, the roof they required was right above their homeroom classroom, which Aoyama had blown a hole in a couple of days prior. They hovered in the tree line, backs against the bark. With a determined nod shared between them, Yurika activated her quirk on them all. Zero shot a length of tape up to the hole, and quickly reeled them all up the building at an alarming speed. Kaminari held Zero's and Yurika's hand, whilst she held Sato's, as the second length of tape reached the rooftop, and the 4 of them made it up there, seemingly undetected. "Gee, good job, guys," Yurika said, trying not to hurl. As quietly as he could, Sato began to prise the cover of their treasure chest off. "Just wait for the signal and don't make a sound," Yurika added, inching back to the edge of the rooftop. "Wait, what's the signal again?" Zero whispered back. "I wasn't really listening, hey, wait." But Sato had already removed the metal covering and exposed the wires. Letting Yurika float him again, the 2 pushed off the roof and made their way slowly back to the ground. Kaminari sighed and leaned against the barricades, gazing out at the distant city lights, so close, yet so far. After a couple of minutes or so of silence, Zero, who had hopped over the barricade to sit on the roof's edge, spoke up, "Hey, Kaminari." "Yeah. Why are we here again?" "Leave Kaminari behind with Zero," Midoriya nodded. "Sato and Yurika will come back to the dorms and announce that their part of the mission was a success before we move on. Meanwhile, we'll be slowly taking off the rest of the anklets. We can leave some downstairs on the sofas, for whoever usually stays up later." "But what about my anklet?" Mina questioned nervously. "It'll be super hard to melt mine off. It's designed like that." "Are you sure about this, Shoto?" Midoriya asked him. Mina was the last to have her anklet removed. She had her leg rested on the table whilst she sat on the sofa, arm over her eyes and teeth gritted. "I'm sure," Shoto replied. No one had ever seen him use his fire before, but Mina was too scared to look. She gasped when she felt the heat get close. Shoto's colder hand had already formed a sheet of ice over her corrosive skin in hopes to protect her and himself. She dared to uncover her eyes for a moment, only to see the red-hot metal start to part. She squealed when Shoto's other hand darted forwards again to freeze a molten droplet of metal, but before she knew it, the anklet had been torn away. There was a synchronized sigh of relief and chorus of praise to Shoto, who smiled softly. Mina plonked the anklet in her tray and tossed it aside on the sofa. She didn't realize she'd feel so free without it on. This was the moment that the window at the back of the common room was opened a little further, and two figures bundled through. "You did it?" Midoriya interrogated immediately. Okako gave him a wobbly thumbs up and everyone cheered. The first scary part was over. "We'll leave the TV on, won't turn the lights off, that kind of thing," Midoriya explained. "Then, we will all go through that back window, follow the path through the trees, staying as far away from any building as possible, and get as far as we can without being close to the cameras." Midoriya shouldered his yellow backpack. This was actually happening. "Ready to go?" he asked his remaining classmates. He got a variety of responses, mainly in their facial expressions, but only a combination of all of them could come close to describing how Midoriya was feeling in that moment. Some looked terrified, others more excited than they ever thought they'd be. Some tried to hide their emotion, others just looked determined. Midoriya nodded and marched towards the window. There are going to be two different exit points. As a failsafe in case something goes wrong, we will all go together to the spot Tokoyami picked out from Team Blue's scouting mission. Then, we will separate into these two teams, Lime and Indigo. I'll be heading Team Lime, and Itza for Team Indigo. Itza nodded in understanding, puffing out his chest at the idea of leadership and responsibility. Midoriya wrote the team members down on the board, rubbing away the rest of the writing to make room. He took his time to do this, listening to his classmates' suggestions and thinking through their power sets as he allocated team members. Team Lime, me, Shoto, Uraraka, Tsu, Koda, Shoji, Sato, Aoyama and Hagakure. Team Indigo, Itza, Yayorozu, Jiro, Kaken, Kirishima, Mina, Ajiro, Tokoyami, Kaminari and Siro. Yayorozu will be handing flashlights to several members of each group, but you can't use them, they're only for emergencies. Yayorozu will be with Itza in Team Indigo and will send up flashes of light to the remaining members of Team Orange, which will be the signal to take out the power. This is the spot, Tokoyami announced as Dark Shadow, much larger in size than usual, curled around a boulder in the middle of the path. "Okay," Midoriya replied, heart beating so fast he feared it would burst out of his chest. "Yayorozu, if you could hand out the flashlights now." She nodded and started to do exactly that. She'd made them in advance, and then ate extra servings of dinner to build up her strength. "Right, then as carefully as you can, get close enough to the school so Kaminari and Siro can see you from the roof. After they take out the power, Siro will exile Kaminari back down the building, and meet up with Yayorozu, who will escort you back to the meeting place. Team Indigo will wait for you there, whilst Team Lime goes ahead to the other escape point, since it's a little further away. We'll see you soon." Uraraka whispered to the other team, giving Jiro a hug goodbye. "Don't mess this up," she replied jokingly as they parted. "The meet-up point is the construction site on the other side of the forest behind UA." Midoriya reminded them. "Head in that direction and wait there until the other team turns up. Send out the coded message to the new group chat on your phones. If they take more than 15 minutes to reply, you send out a scout group to see what happened." With a few more waves and understanding nods, Midoriya and the rest of Team Lime hurried off into the trees. They waited at the edge until they saw a brilliant flash of light from UA's rooftop. Kaminari had taken out the power. Now the real test began. Tokoyami and I have talked about the wall's weak points that we will be targeting. The one that Team Indigo will be heading towards is closest, and you just have to go straight from the point where we part ways. You need to help each other climb the wall and try not to leave behind any evidence that you were there. Team Lime, we will be going a little further and away from the hero patrol routes more. We're going to circle around all the dorm buildings as quickly as we can, and Uraraka should be able to float us all over the wall. The section is covered in vines and clearly has not had a maintenance check in a while, Tokoyami explained. The woodland continues behind it. Bakugo didn't have time to be annoyed at stupid little things like Sparky's incessant talking now that he was in his freaking dunce mode. Elbows had to tape his mouth shut. Or how bugged he was that Four Eyes was their leader, or just, Deku in general. Bakugo had geared himself up for a fight, but it didn't look as though he'd be getting one. Deku's plan was too well thought out for that. It looked as though they'd all leave UA exactly as planned, and that the heroes would only know by morning what had really happened. By then, they'd be long gone. They'd had the hero patrols drilled into their brains earlier that evening. The nearest hero at that moment in time was Hound Dog, who was likely still on the other side of the main building. He was their biggest threat, since he could smell them. Bakugo supposed that was one of the main reasons why the class was halved and split up, because that would confuse the hero if he ever picked up on their trail. Bakugo had to admit that he was looking forward to being out of UA. Finally, he'd have a chance to properly rage again. To act like the powerful hero that he was always freaking meant to be. Sure, he'd have to carry a few of these losers along the way, but some of them seemed at least the slightest bit competent, like Kirishima and Jiro and maybe some of the other vigilantes. Well, they would all be freaking vigilantes soon. That word still seemed strange and foreign to Bakugo. He was too used to referring to himself as a hero. Whatever, ultimately, it wasn't that different. Just vigilantes seemed to be a whole lot more fun. "Can't we use our torches?" the raccoon-eyed acid idiot whispered to those leading the group. "I can't see a thing." SHH. Tape Arms hissed. "Commonary's bad enough. We don't need you making noise. You're speaking too. Only because you are. Would you shut up?" Bakugo thundered back at them in the quietest tone he could muster, still probably a little too loud. "We can't use the torches because it could give away our position." Four Eyes retorted. "The cameras are off," Raccoon Eyes groaned. "The heroes could still see us," said Ponytail Girl. This was when Jiro froze beside Bakugo, her earphone jacks twitching in the air as she squinted her eyes in the darkness. "What's wrong?" asked Kirishima, who had also noticed she'd stopped. Once he said that, everyone else also slowed to a halt. "I think I hear something," she whispered. Probably just an owl," Raccoon Eyes insisted. Let's keep going." Uncertainly, Jiro nodded, and they continued. But a few moments later, Bakugo heard a branch snap. Both he and Jiro whirled around immediately, soon followed by the rest. They all held their breath as they glanced around in the darkness. Eventually, Ponytail dared to click the on button on her torch. Just in time to see a figure dart behind a tree. "Go, run," Jiro whispered. And when no one responded to her, Bakugo gritted his teeth, forced himself away from a confrontation, and yelled. "Run, you idiots! Run! You have a problem, Monoma," said Tsuburaba, his eyebrows raised. Monoma scowled at him. He was sitting on a chair by the window, occasionally glancing out of it. Class A's dorm was right next to theirs. "They're up to something," he hissed, narrowing his eyes at the shadows that moved around in the light of their common room. "I just know it." "Yeah, well, the last time you confronted them, it didn't end too well, and now my phone is utterly screwed. So, thanks a lot." Monoma ignored him, resting his chin in his hands. "I don't care what excuses they gave their teacher. Something's not right here. And 18 is behind it? 18 really saved you yesterday," Sen shrugged, sipping at his coffee. "Maybe you should just stop provoking him." "Yeah, come on, Monoma." Kendo sighed. 18, what's his name again?" "Midoriya," interjected Honuki. "Right, Midoriya just seems to want to protect his classmates, just like you are. It's very honorable of you, but you need to understand that he's trying to do the same, just maybe not in the best way. You should really try to get along with him. With his quirk and yours, he could really help you out," Kendo beamed, her sunshine-like smile lighting up the whole room. But Monoma still couldn't shake this feeling. One of Class A had sided up with the villains, who's to say the rest haven't? He'd taken it upon himself to do his own research, and Monoma had found a very interesting video in the depths of the internet, of 18 himself, dripping in a decent amount of slime as he yelled at the surrounding heroes, spitting words of such hatred and venom that even Monoma shuddered. Yeah, Honuki nodded. "Yeah, about that, there's something that I should probably tell." Monoma perked up, holding a hand out to Honuki to stop him from talking. There, in the shadows of Class A's dorms, he spied 4 figures slip from an open window and into the night. Can I speak now?" Honmuki tried to continue. SHH. Monoma silenced him, leaning closer to the window, but they were already gone. Monoma, what is going on with you? Frowned Setsuna. I just saw something, he hissed in reply. What? Frowned Tsuburaba. I saw something. It's like 10 o'clock at night. Setsuna exclaimed. You need to stop suspecting Class A of every little thing, it's getting old. I saw some leave through the window. Monoma insisted, standing up and trying to tilt his head at a better angle to see the other dorm. I swear. You're tired, Monoma, sighed Sen. Just go to bed. They're up to something, Monoma breathed. I knew it. Monoma. Pony interjected, tapping him on the shoulder. You're acting, how do you say? Crazy. Pony's right, nodded Kurohiro. Monoma's antics had gathered quite a crowd at this point. Nothing mysterious is at foot. There is, Monoma retorted. Look, Setsuna, watch with me, just for a little longer, and you'll see, I swear. There was a moment of hesitation, before Setsuna sighed and rolled her eyes. Fine, she unwillingly nodded, before taking an eye out of her head with her limb-detaching quirk and setting it down on the windowsill beside Monoma. Who wants to try beating me at Mario Kart when I have only one eye? And so, the rest of the class wandered away from Monoma and over to their video game. Monoma would have joined in, had he not been so sure he'd seen something. About 10 minutes passed, and he started to this he was going nuts. Until... Oh, Setsuna gasped from across the room, her detached eye narrowing at the sight before it and Monoma. Two members of Class A had just hurried back to the window they'd climbed out of and slipped back inside. Oh, that is interesting, Setsuna breathed, pausing the game which she was winning by a long mile, and walking over to shove her eye back in her head. I told you, Monoma grinned. He was right? What, pray tell, is going on? Questioned Shiozaki, who now accompanied them. Monoma was right, Setsuna said, as though didn't quite believe it. A couple members of Class A just ran back to their dorm. Wait, really? A ways gaped from over the sofa. Not long after, Monoma saw him, 18, clamber out of that very same window. He stood up tall, brushing the dirt off his knees, and looked around. Monoma grabbed Setsuna's shoulder and pulled her down and out of plain sight along with him, whilst the others simply sidestepped away. Cautiously, Monoma and the rest peered back through the window, to see even more of Class A flee the building, and hurry off into the cover of the surrounding trees. What are they doing? Kendo wondered aloud. Monoma gritted his teeth, I'm not sure, but I'm going to find out. What? Tsuburaba exclaimed, you can't, it's after curfew. That hasn't stopped them. Yeah, but we're the heroes. We're supposed to follow the rules. Besides, look what happened last time. My phone. Oh, shut up about your phone already, yelled Kamakiri. Monoma's right, we should step in. I hate to admit it, but it might be the best thing to do, Setsuna winced, turning to Kendo. Look, that's my suggestion, but I'm the vice rep, we'll do whatever you think's the best. Kendo seemed unsure. What if they're going to let more villains into the school, Kendo? Monoma tried, finally tearing his eyes away from the window. He was quite sure all of Class A had left by this point, and the first two never came back. We have a chance to stop it now. I couldn't quite prove it yesterday, but we can now. And I'll be more careful with what quirks I copy. The entire class stood up, waiting for Kendo's verdict. Until, finally, she deflated, okay, but we don't fight them unless they fight us. Monoma grinned. I'm coming for you, 18. Chapter 12, do you understand? Monoma cursed under his breath, he'd been spotted. There was no use in being careful now, and Class A was on the move. Let's go, he called out to the others as he sprinted ahead. Shizhida skidded in front of the group, activating his beast transformation quirk to block their path. It worked in diverting them, straight into Shiozaki, who had already set up a net of vines to trap them. The girl with the high ponytail, 20, Monoma believed was her number, however, had turned a flashlight on, and the light fell on Shiozaki too quickly. Follow me, called out the girl with the hearing quirk whose number Monoma couldn't remember. She expertly led them through a gap in Class B's plan and darted through the trees. Watch out, yelled Honmuki, causing Class B to jump to the left and right. He slammed his foot down on the ground, and Monoma watched the earth ripple as the quicksand caught up with the villains. The ground, warned Tetsu's red-headed friend, number 8, and the opposing side quickly split up to dodge the attack. "I'm calling Mr. Vlad," Kendo announced, muttering about how she should have done this earlier. "Dark Shadow," yelled bird-headed number 14, whose frightening shadow leapt at Kendo from the darkness. "Kendo, look out," yelled Tsuburaba. Kendo screeched as the shadow slashed and split her phone in half, right in her hand. "I've got it," proclaimed Kurohiro, who used his black morphing quirk to leap right inside the shadow and take control. 14 grunted as he was punched in the stomach with his own power. There was a flash of light from eternally angry number 17, cupping an explosion in his hands, which made the shadow creature whine and disappear, leaving Kurohiro on the ground. "Don't attack, Bakugo," yelled 8 when Monoma saw the villain ready to send a ball of fire at his friend's face. "Remember the vigilante loopholes." 17 cried out in frustration and continued to run with his classmates. "There's the wall," the super hearing girl suddenly exclaimed as the border to UA came into view. "Oh, no you don't." Tetsu cried out, and he barreled right into number 8, knocking him off path. This resulted in the latter activating his quirk and beginning to fight back. Monoma was hyper-aware that he hadn't seen 18 yet. Where was he? Waiting in the shadows, ready to jump out and attack when he least expected it. This was when he scanned the area, and realized. "Only half of them are here," he yelled to his classmates. 18 and the rest must be somewhere else. "Damn it," yelled the villain with the tape quirk, hauling his friend around, who was tied up with his mouth taped shut. "We need to get Kaminari over the wall first." "Screw that." 17 suddenly yelled, "and screw the loopholes." "Wait." 8 cried, taking a punch from Tetsu, "Bakugo, don't." But it was too late. With a flash and a bang louder than Monoma had ever heard, the explosive villain destroyed the wall in seconds. And a shrill alarm rang across the school. "What is that?" Hagakure cried. Midoriya looked around in fear. The corner of his eyes had caught a flash of light in the distance. Not long after, a familiar alarm filled his ears. "Oh, no," he murmured, eyes settling on a plume of smoke rising into the stormy night sky, contrasted against the light of UA and the city beyond. "Kaken, you didn't. Did he just blow up the wall?" Eureka exclaimed, grabbing Midoriya's hand as he scrambled onto the top of their part of said wall. Everyone but them were over now. They'd completed their mission. Shoji reached up and hauled himself back onto the wall. He created several new ears on the end of his tentacle-like hands and announced, "I think they're fighting." "What?" Tsu called up at them, "Who are they fighting, Ribbit? The heroes shouldn't be anywhere near them." Hagakure added. "Whatever it isn't good," Shoto acknowledged stiffly. "Damn it. It had all been going so well. What did they miss? We have to help them," Midoriya announced, starting to run down the length of the wall. "Wait, Midori." Eureka called out, running after him. "We can't risk going to them." Shoto tried to reason with him as they all ran to keep up with him, on the floor beside the wall. Perhaps we should go to the rendezvous point," Aoyama panted. "If they're fighting, they need all the help they can get," Midoriya reasoned, not daring to stop. He jumped over rivets in the wall, scrambling up sudden inclines as it moved with the land. This was the quickest way to get to the others. "Up there," someone called out. With no more warning than that, Midoriya was suddenly pulled off the wall. Constricting vines covered him from head to toe like a spider would do to a fly. He couldn't see, couldn't speak, could barely breathe as he felt himself be tugged around. When he struggled, the vines only grew tighter. The sounds around him were muffled, but he could just hear his friends' cries as the attack began. He could do nothing until there was a familiar drop in temperature, and the vines were yanked harshly away from him. Midoriya took a deep breath and coughed, gasping for air. "Are you okay?" Shoto asked after saving him yet again. "Why yeah," Midoriya replied, taking his hand and getting to his feet. He looked around to find ice surrounding them like a jagged halo. When he turned to his left, he nearly jumped 3 feet into the air at the sight of the vine-haired member of Class B, all but her face encased in ice. "Class B!" Midoriya exclaimed as Tsu's tongue was wrapped around his waist and he was pulled away again. "We have to get to the others, Ribbit," she announced. "Alright," and Midoriya kept running. They attacked us first, Shoto reminded him as they ran. That works for the vigilante loophole you mentioned, right? Yeah. It does, we have to act in self-defense, and nothing else. Got it? Yurika replied as they finally reached the scene of the new exit to UA, designed and built by none other than Katsuki Bakugo. Idiot. Midoriya didn't have time to think before they were back in the fray. He leapt to dodge Honuki's softening quirk that would have trapped him in quicksand, an action that the others thankfully copied. Speaking of which, think you could outsmart us, 18, and Monoma leapt into view. His hands suddenly enlarged to at least the same size as the rest of his body, and Midoriya just barely ducked out of the way with reflexes that Kiken had been training in him since they were little kids. Don't let him touch your bare skin. Monoma warned the rest of Class B as he continued his attack on Midoriya. How Midoriya managed to consistently evade him was a complete and utter mystery. Another wall of ice from Shoto accidentally blocked Monoma from Midoriya whilst Shoto fought his own battles. Midoriya managed to scramble away and hide behind the nearest tree, which was when he caught sight of Yayorozu, a little out of the way of the battle. Yayorozu, he exclaimed, scurrying towards her. She was stuck fast to the ground with some kind of hardened glue, and one of her arms was seemingly fused with the tree behind her. She struggled to get free, but there was no use, even when Midoriya pitched in, dropping his rucksack to her side as he did so. If you can defeat Class B, then the others can help get me free afterwards, she insisted, and then held her free arm out to him. Take this. Midoriya blinked at her for a moment, until with a slight shimmer of light, he realized there was a metal handle protruding from her forearm. With a slight grin, Midoriya took a hold of it and pulled, revealing an awfully familiar sword. Look out, she suddenly cried. Midoriya pivoted and blocked with the sword, just in time to block the blade of a green, insect-like hero student. Attacking with a sword, he hissed at him, pushing against Midoriya as he pushed back. You were the one who snuck up behind me with a blade quirk. Midoriya retorted. Need some help, and Ajiro appeared out of nowhere, jumping down from the trees to tackle the guy with the blade quirk. Midoriya let Ajiro, the more experienced of the two, take the lead as they both battled the hero student. Midoriya made sure he couldn't get away, and occasionally blocked newly formed blades whilst Ajiro took a more hands-on approach. It wasn't exactly easy to fight an experienced vigilante with a rather muscular tail thrown in the mix. Ajiro eventually pushed him into one of his classmates' own traps, and he sunk waist-deep in Honuki's quicksand. Honuki, he yelled in frustration. But the moment his classmate turned to rescue him, Shoto froze him in place, and both remained immobile. The victory didn't last long, however, because Midoriya soon found himself under attack by the girl with the vines again, who had somehow gotten free from Shoto's icy prison. But Midoriya wasn't going down so easily this time. He slashed at the vines with Yayorozu's sword, freeing Jiro in the process. Ha, ha, she cried victoriously as she kicked the remaining vines away. Not caught yet, Bakugo. Oh yeah, he called back, fighting against Sen, whose hands could swivel at an alarming speed, as though they were drills. As far as I'm aware, I'm still freaking better than you. He laughed when she got caught in a glue trap by monstrous-looking Bondo and cried out in frustration. Midoriya, meanwhile, was doing rather well, considering he had next to no experience with a sword, mainly because the blade was highly effective against the onslaught of vines. He thought he was about to best his opponent, which, of course, jinxed the outcome immediately. Midoriya inhaled sharply as two blades suddenly manifested over both his shoulders, crossing in front of his neck. Monoma, covering his skin with a friend's jacket, yelled over Midoriya's shoulder, "Everyone stop right there." That got their attention, and now all eyes were on Midoriya's critical situation. The sword was yanked from his hand by an invisible force, and flew to the hand of a silver-haired girl from Class B. "Stop there," Monoma repeated. "Put your hands in the air, 18. My skin is covered, you can't take my power." Midoriya would have pointed out that the blade sticking out of his arms, with the quirk he'd copied from his stuck friend, technically could have counted as part of him. But it wasn't like Midoriya could really steal his quirk, and Monoma's power clearly hasn't been cancelled out yet. Kiken dared to laugh, "Ha! Like you'd actually kill him." Midoriya tried to struggle free but stopped when Monoma actually pressed the blades against his skin. "No, I won't kill him, I'm not a villain," he hissed. But then Midoriya felt a hand reach for his left shoulder, where bandages poked out under his t-shirt, and Monoma squeezed. Midoriya tried not to cry out, but he couldn't help it. Midoriya's friends backed away, a few shocked yelps were shared between them. "He's your leader, right?" the hero student breathed, still clutching Midoriya's shoulder in an unspoken threat, blade still raised against his neck. "You won't be able to carry out your plan without him. So, go on. Leave him behind." The members of Class A that were still able to fight hesitated, glancing between each other, unsure of their next move. This would usually be where Midoriya made a decision, but at the moment, he didn't have a clue of what to do. "Monoma, he'll just take your quirk," warned a hero student with green, scaled arms and a tight plate. "My skin is covered," Monoma repeated. "And all of your classmates still have their quirks, don't they, 18, he laughed. "See, this is where I'm stronger than you. All you can do is take. Without stealing someone else's power away from them, you are a useless. Quirkless. Nothing." Midoriya gritted his teeth, feeling his fury boil and overflow, his eyes blazing with anger only comparable to Kiken's. "I am not." He elbowed Monoma in the neck, in a certain spot that Eureka had once taught him to aim for. "Useless." In surprise, Monoma stumbled backwards, blades parting for just a second. This gave Midoriya just enough time to pivot on his heel and punch Monoma right in the nose. There was a gasp of shock from several onlookers as Monoma fell to the ground, blades shrinking away and blood pouring from his nose. Midoriya just panted and stared at the fallen foe, ignoring the red speckles on his knuckles. There was a second gasp as the girl with the silver hair was frozen, and Shoto was then right there, holding the hilt of the sword out to Midoriya. "Here. Thanks." This was the moment that the scene of their battle was Class B was flooded with light, when previously ignored lamps switched on, and the surviving cameras on the walls nearby blinked red, raising their mechanical heads and turning towards the scene. Kiken wasn't the only one who let out a rather rude word as the hole in the wall that he'd made was suddenly non-existent, rising back up and rebuilding itself. "What's?" Midoriya started. He caught the eye of a dark-haired girl, taped to a tree not far from Yayorozu. She held a phone in her hand, the light of it cutting through the darkness that remained. "Yes, Kode," cried out a classmate of hers with a blue and white hairband, who had somehow ended up stuck high in the branches of the very same tree. Midoriya turned at the sound of footsteps, and backed away from Monoma as he saw a whole crowd of ectoplasm clones surround them, alongside Cementos, who must have fixed the wall, and Hound Dog, who must have been the one to lead the heroes to them. Midoriya could also see Midnight in the corner of his eye, and he knew that they didn't stand a chance. "Drop the sword, 18, Miss Midnight ordered." Midoriya gazed down at the blade, finally noting the blood on the back of his hand. He let it fall to the ground. "Midoriya." Shoto hissed, fist still raised and clearly ready to continue the fight. "No," he shook his head, raising his hands once again above his head. "It's over." There was an ectoplasm clone on each of them, whilst Class B was rescued from various precarious positions, such as halfway sunken underground or halfway up a tree. Some members of Class A too needed help. However, it was noticeably clear that, had the fight gone on much longer, it would have been Class A who reigned victorious. Clutching the bridge of his nose in one hand, and cupping the stream of blood with the other, Monoma glared at Midoriya. "He's the leader," the hero student snarled. "They won't go anywhere without him. You need to fail that freaking quirk stealer. And speaking of which, give me my quirk back." "Monoma, calm down," one of the ectoplasm clones insisted. "But thank you for the information." Midoriya's eyes returned to being fixed on the ground. He didn't dare to meet the gaze of any of the heroes, nor his classmates. "Midnight, ectoplasm, possibly the real one," began, "I think it may be best to." Midnight cleared her throat. "Yes, I agree." Midoriya frowned as he heard her approach him. "Wait, what are you?" He looked up in time to see her hand reach his face, and only just heard his classmates' cries as he fell to the ground, unconscious. When Midoriya came to, he found himself back in the dorms, lying on the sofa, the back of it shielding him from view of his classmates. Groggily, he opened his eyes. The first thing they rested on, apart from the ceiling, was what would have been the window directly opposite him. Except it wasn't a window anymore. It was completely blocked out with concrete. That made him sit up. "He's awake." Midoriya wasn't sure who said that. He flopped back down, rubbing at his temples whilst his classmates gathered around him, perching on the other sofas or the arms of his There was a moment of solemn silence. What happened? Midoriya groaned, breaking it? Midnight put you to sleep with her quirk, Itza explained. That makes it sound like she straight up killed him, Jiro interjected. For a second, I almost thought she did, Kaminari laughed nervously. Maybe that's because I was still a little shorted out. It just really surprised me, you know. It surprised me too, Ribbit, said Tsu. I guess she did that in case we thought of running off again. She knew we wouldn't leave Midoriya behind. Midoriya wasn't even looking at them at this point. He covered his eyes with his hands and sighed deeply. I'm such an idiot. You're not an idiot, Midori. Yurika insisted, kneeling down in front of him. You planned everything out so well. I didn't plan for Class B. I planned for everything except Class B. Why do I always miss one option out? No one expected Class B to jump in like that, Yayorozu insisted, sitting down on the coffee table beside Yurika. That isn't on you, Midoriya. He sighed again, finally sitting up and feeling the blood rush from his head, which made him dizzy. But Mr. Aizawa was right. With false strengths come real weaknesses. Because of my stupid prank, Monoma's been targeting us. He thinks it's some kind of competition between us. Don't hold yourself so freaking highly, Kaken snapped, which made Midoriya flinch, a habit he was sure he'd gotten over. Kaken noticed this and rolled his eyes. Yeah, you were the one who blew up the wall. Mina exclaimed. You set the alarm off. Oh, so now it's my fault, huh, he yelled back. Guys, please, let's not argue. Midoriya practically begged. Agreed. Everyone froze. Midoriya bowed his head a little, watching from the tops of his eyes as footsteps approached. Bandaged Mr. Aizawa came into view. There was absolute silence for a few moments too many. Eventually, Mr. Aizawa pulled a chair over with his foot, pushing it in front of the television screen, meaning it was directly opposite Midoriya, and sat down. The silence returned. I have one question for you all, their teacher said after a minute or so. Why? No one replied. Why? He repeated more forcefully. Midoriya realized that no one else would speak up, they were waiting for him. You were in this class, Mr. Aizawa, I thought you, of all people, would understand. The gaps in between speaking were long and tedious, as each of them mulled each other's words over carefully. You were trying to escape UA? No. No, I don't understand. He sounded so hurt. I am sorry, Midoriya insisted. We don't want what UA could give us. We don't want to just struggle through the rest of our lives, labeled as outcasts by simply being in this class. We didn't want to be as powerless as we were at the USJ, we didn't want to be pushed aside by the world again. We didn't want to go through the sports festival. We wanted control over our own futures, and UA couldn't give that to us. And you all feel this way. They nodded without hesitation, all huddled up together, as far from Mr. Aizawa as they could get. What were you going to do once you were out? He continued to interrogate. Where were you going to go? Did you even think this through? We thought everything though, sir, Itza replied. Midoriya quickly realized that he was following one of the fallback plans. If Mr. Aizawa were unable to place the blame on one person, no one would be failed. So, Itza was trying to ensure that Midoriya wouldn't take all the responsibility for the matter. But what Midoriya didn't inform the class, was that he had no intention of taking that risk. If someone was going to have to leave for this, it would be him. So, you were just going to survive on the run? Mr. Aizawa asked in disbelief. How is that a better life than what UA could have given you? The way he said that struck further fear in Midoriya's heart. Specifically, the word could. I know you had a better reason than that. What did you really want to do once you were out? You would know, sir, Midoriya replied. He finally dared to look up and meet his eyes. You were in Class 1A for the exact same reason. He didn't reply immediately, and simply stared at him, whilst Midoriya stared back. Vigilantes. You wanted to be heroes. Midoriya shook his head. Not heroes. We're not like you. Perhaps he said that a little forcefully, maybe he just didn't care anymore. Mr. Aizawa seemed unfazed. Every single one of you. You wanted to be a team of vigilantes. Midoriya exchanged glances with a few of his friends. He didn't need to reply because they all nodded. Their teacher was just stunned. It was as though he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Eventually, he asked the question Midoriya had been waiting for. Who came up with the idea? He asked, looking right at Midoriya, as though he already knew the answer. It was a joint effort, Aitsa answered instantly. No, Midoriya retorted, no, it wasn't, it was my idea. It was my plan. I convinced them all to join me. It's not their fault. Midoriya, Aitsa gaped, realizing what he was doing. You do realize that I will have to seriously consider your expulsion for this. Mr. Aizawa warned him. Midoriya swallowed the lump in his throat. I know. Midoriya, Aitsa exclaimed, leaping to his feet, not caring that Mr. Aizawa was right there. You said we'd all take the blame equally. We can't all be expelled. Why did you? Well, I lied, Midoriya snapped. It's not worth risking your future. Sit down, Aitsa, he practically commanded. Aitsa hesitated, but did as he was told, now staring blankly at the ground. What about your future, Midoriya? Asked Mr. Aizawa. He blinked at the use of his real name. What future? Midoriya ignored the way his classmates stared at him. He kept his gaze fixed on Mr. Aizawa, whose expression did not change. Midoriya, Aitsa repeated. You can't say such things about yourself. Why not? Everyone knows it. Midoriya just didn't care anymore. Shoto was right, UA amounted to nothing. There was no way out of the life he had been dealt. He might as well face it. It was like the stages of grief. To grieve life, rather than death. There was his denial. Midoriya strived to be a hero, whatever it takes. He ran towards the blinding light held upon the pillars that society forged, desperate to cling to them, be amongst them. But unlike so many others, Midoriya refused to see the truth. He could never be that. Then there was anger. He shouted at the heroes, spat at them, screamed until his voice grew hoarse. He fought back against Kiken, dragging him down into the dark pit of failure that Midoriya had grown so used to. He bargained with the system he was swept up in. He pushed Kiken into the river, whilst he was unknowingly being swept up in its current alongside him. He tried to find a way around Class A, to squeeze out the gaps with clever tricks and twisted words. And maybe he skipped that whole depressive stage. Because this was his acceptance. Mr. Aizawa, please, I don't have a place in this world, Midoriya continued, voice devoid of emotion. I have no power, no hope, no life, no real path to take. I'm destined to be a side character, someone for the heroes to save from the big bad villain one day and gain all the glory they could hope for. But that's not something that someone like me can ever have for themselves. So, don't take pity on me, I don't care anymore. I'm a dead weight. Expel me, not them. At least they could do some good in the world. Then, at least I would have done something that mattered in the long run. Silence. Mr. Aizawa finally spoke up, I'm sorry. Midoriya didn't know what to say to that, so he just stared straight ahead. Mr. Aizawa happened to be in that direction. Midoriya, if you could be a hero, would you take that chance? He blinked at him. The question took him by surprise. I can't be a hero, sir. I thought I made that clear. Why can't you be a hero? Midoriya wavered, I just can't. I'm quirkless. What's my quirk? You, nullify other powers. Mr. Aizawa shifted a little forward in his chair, yes. I make other people quirkless. Tell me again, once that is activated, what is my power? You're quirkless. I don't really have a quirk, Midoriya. All I can do is make sure that no one else has one either. And say what you want about that. The point is, I was able to become a hero just fine without much of a power. Why can't you? Midoriya was lost for words. He tried to say something in reply, but nothing fell out. Mr. Aizawa's gaze drifted away from him. You all, seriously wanted to be vigilantes. His eyes rested on Shoto, who now sat next to Midoriya. Realizing this was a question aimed at him, Shoto braved making a reply, this has nothing to do with my father, or Dabi, he explained. This is my decision, and mine alone. They don't rule my life. I don't care what either of them think. Would you be a hero? Mr. Aizawa actually asked Shoto Todoroki. Not just a vigilante, would you be a real hero, if given the chance? Shoto thought long and hard about his response. Sir, I don't know. But that wasn't a no. Mr. Aizawa nodded. After a while, whilst silence rang in Midoriya's ears, he spoke up again. There is still the matter of what to do following this escape attempt. First things first, Midoriya. He bowed his head, readying himself for those faithful words. Shoto stood up. Mr. Aizawa, if you expel Midoriya, you will soon have every reason to expel me too. Midoriya stared at him. How many of you would I soon have every reason to expel, following Midoriya's expulsion? And slowly but surely, nearly every single one of his classmates raised their hands. Mr. Aizawa nodded. Midoriya. He flinched. Your class president. He stared, mouth agape. What? And you have 3 weeks detention. Yeah, that was a little more expected. Midoriya stood up. Sir. I can't be class representative. Why not? Because Aiza should be class president. Congratulations, Aiza, you're vice president. Mr. Aizawa. Midoriya cried, but his teacher completely ignored him. He stood up, about to walk away and just leave them there. Excuse me, sir, but why is no one else getting detention, Ribbit, croaked Tsu. He hesitated. Would you all volunteer to take some of Midoriya's detention time? They all nodded instantly. Good. Midoriya, you have 2 weeks detention. No one else, only you, and he continued to walk away. You can have your windows back when we've decided you'll behave. Don't make us put security cameras up in the dorms. Mr. Aizawa. Midoriya yelled, following him partway. He stopped by the door. Yes. Midoriya only stared for a moment, face molded with such bewilderment that he felt as though his brain was doing jump rope. Do you really think we could be heroes? Real ones? He answered without a second thought, yes. Even after what we've done. Without a shadow of a doubt. But, why? Yeah, we're villains, added Eureka, reaching Midoriya's side. How could we be heroes if the whole world hates us? Questioned Kirishima. Sir, we can't even live normal lives, Yaoyorozu stammered. How could we possibly live the life of a hero after everything that's happened? That's exactly the reason, Mr. Aizawa nodded, opening the door as he spoke. He stood there and stared at the outside world for a moment before continuing. No, I don't believe any of you can graduate back into society. I don't think any of you are prepared for that, and I don't think you ever will be. With gritted teeth and a manic smile, he turned back to them. Because you can be something bigger. You aren't villains, you never were, and you never will be. But you can take that fire inside of you and put it to good use. The smile faded as quickly as it had arrived. He sighed deeply and took a step outside, letting the rest of his class approach the door, all standing around Midoriya as they waited for their teacher's words. He gestured around him, the best he could with the bandages that restricted him. So, we're in a hero school, aren't we? Well, then, if you genuinely want it, let's be heroes. Alright, that's where we'll leave off for the day. Thanks so much for listening along with me today. If you enjoyed, please like and comment down below. It really helps with the algorithms. I look forward to seeing you next time. Ciao for now, lovelies.